Sorry about that. Right, so it's been wonderful so far in the Shiny for Good track, and now we're about to have our keynote. So I love open source, and if you love open source, you will definitely enjoy this session. This keynote we're about to have. Anyway, so we are about to be joined by Tracy K. Teal on maintaining and managing open source projects. So for some background for people who may not know her, Tracy is the open source program director at Nixla. She's involved in open source software and reproducible research communities and has been working in open source communities, developing curriculum and teaching people how to work with data science and code as a developer, an instructor, and project leader throughout her career. And now I'll hand over to Tracy to share her insights with us. Thank you, Tracy.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Everything looked okay before I get started? Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me today for this talk, and particularly for this Shiny for Good session. I love that that's a part of this conference because I think it's important to talk about all of the pieces of open source as we go through our journeys. So today I'm going to talk about it's not just code, surviving and thriving as an open source maintainer. I would love to have questions. I won't be checking the chat during the talk, but please put them in as we go or have conversations there. I'll check in at the end and the moderators will help with things as well. Also, we'll have some questions for you along the way, so we'll see that. Okay. Okay, awesome. Okay, so we have probably all seen this XKCD comic about the modern digital infrastructure, all software, basically balancing on the leg of a project some random person in Nebraska has been thanklessly maintaining, right? And we've sort of realized that, thought about it. This is an older comic. We've been talking about this for a while. And this is really important. This is something that is an important consideration in our whole software stack and in a lot of the things that we're talking about today. But this drawing is about a structure, and it has there a picture of a block representing the project, and it does reference the random person. But this isn't represented just by this block, it's represented by actual people. So these are some random person. And so when we take a look at the structure, it's not that it's being held up by a block. It's actually being held up by a person. And a lot of our narrative around how do, oh my gosh, this is terrible. How can we make this different? Is that our advice to those people is that they just get stronger. Maybe you're better at handling criticism. Maybe you're tougher around feedback. Maybe you figure out how to balance your time more so you have more hours in the day. And so there's just a lot of narrative around personal responsibility and that person sort of making themselves stronger and better. And this is a topic that's really important to me personally, because this is a space that I've been in for a long time. And so a lot of the people that are represented by random person are my friends, are my colleagues, are me. And I've seen the struggles that that I've had, that my friends have had. I started working in the Carpentries, which is a nonprofit organization teaching researchers to work with data and code. We had thousands of volunteers around the world, also all working on their own open source projects. And then went on to be the open source program director at our studio and Posit, and on the board at Pi OpenSci. I've been on the board and advisory committees at NumFocus, and I'm now the open source program director at Nixla. So not only is this a personal challenge for me before, it continues to be, but the people that I care about, that I manage, that I work with, are all confronting all of these challenges. And I've seen that we have to do it alone. And so I'm really passionate about bringing these ideas forward about how they affect people as people, and not asking people to, go self-care themselves out of these situations, but instead to think about what we can collectively do together, or what kinds of things exist. So rather than thinking about that person just getting stronger, I want to think about what actual structures exist that can help people hold that weight. So that's what I'm going to focus this talk on today: is what things exist, what maybe some things could be built that would help us carry the load. Okay, so I am going to have 3 sections. So one is about questions, templates, and tools. Another about sustainable support and community. And then finally, a little more conversation than here's how things work, but how might AIs and LLMs change some of the landscape for open source maintainers? Okay, we will start with questions, templates, and tools. Okay, so you've been working on a project for a while, and you're kind of doing the day to day. And so it's hard sometimes to pause and think about like where you are and what your goals are. But all of the things that I'm going to talk about in the rest of this talk, they rely on doing this sort of assessment first of knowing where you are and where you want to go, because those are the foundation for being able to make choices and build structure and find the things you need. So I'm going to kick us off with 4 key questions to ask about your project and an aspiration. So first, take a step back. Why did you start or join this project in the first place? What stage is your project now? So this is some examples: experimental, you're just trying something out; stable, this is something that you feel like is in a good place, you're not adding a lot of new features, you're pretty happy with where it is; and sunsetting, this is also a legitimate phase for a project where you're deciding that you're not going to do more work on it. How would you describe one type of person that your project serves? So this is the idea that understanding your users, and there's actually a lot of questions that go into understanding your users, but here it's basically write a paragraph and describe what it is that they do. Are they a researcher at a university? Are they working with spatial data? What other things do they have going on in their lives? Is this something central to their work or something they just sort of have to get done? So kind of tell a story about a person that your project serves. And then about your team. How many contributors do you have? And how much time and energy do we all have? Right? And be realistic. There's an aspirational idea of, okay, here's how much time we all have. But realistically, and the reason to do that assessment is because when you're making these choices, if you have a realistic picture, it gives you the space to say yes and no to things. And finally, an aspiration. So if you could write this sentence for yourself: in 1 year, I will be happy if I am spending X amount of time on this project. I'm excited about Y and not worried about Z. So that is not a sentence probably that you can sit down and write right now. But it's food for thought to think about if you could write this sentence for yourself and put it on a sticky note or a piece of paper, and keep that as kind of a guiding star as to where you would want to be in a year. That, again, is a framework for helping you make decisions and decide which structures and language and communities are right for you. So none of these are these are tough questions. These are not ones that I'm going to ask you to answer in this talk. but ones to consider. And I do have a whole list of questions in a workshop. I'll share that resource at the end. But I am going to ask us to answer the first one together. So I've set up a Slido. So you can go to slido.com and then enter this code here. And you can scan the barcode, so you can do this on mobile. So you can go there, and we're going to take a couple minutes and have people think for a second. You don't need to type right away. Take a little bit, and then type why did you start or join this project? And I do have it says a cap of 200 responses. So I don't know how many people are here, but if you are not getting through, that might be why. I love it. The variety. I mean, so already I think what's really interesting as we see responses come in is that sometimes we assume that everybody's motivation for working on open source is the same, but we can already see here that people have a lot of different reasons that they're contributing to open source. And so that's really important when we're thinking about our goals or thinking about our community, our contributors, and our users. Data ethics, I love it. Day-to-day work, learning, contribute, voluntold. Voluntolding is a real thing in open source. Solve a problem collaboratively. Awesome. Okay, you can keep typing, and then if you have it, you'll see responses. Okay, so now we have the next question. So why you started in that project? This is about taking that step back. Is it still true for you why you work on it now? Great. Okay. So again, diversity of responses here. Lots of people for whom that's mainly still true. Some for whom it's not, or totally different. So that again is just a really nice assessment for you to do yourself, because it's okay to have had goals that you had before or reasons that you did something for that are not true for you now. You are a different person than past you. Your life might be different. Your goals might be different. It's okay for those things to change. And that's a great place to start when you're evaluating where you want to put your attention or what's next for you. Okay, right. So whether your reasons have changed or stay the same, that's okay. So what we want to do in anything that we're thinking about is to start where we are and use what we have. We don't need to be a different person to start doing anything different or be at a different place. So I shared just 4 questions, but I have a lot more questions that you could ask yourself about your project and ways like questions to get more insight into your contributors or your users. And there's a worksheet in this project. So this is a workshop I taught at ShinyConf where there were maybe more questions than answers. But I do like to start with the questions because they are really grounding. Okay. So awesome. Like you've thought about things, you've taken the step back, you've answered these questions, and already, right? Like that takes time. And a lot of what I'll say here is like doing this kind of work, not looking at PRs, not looking at issues, working on your project versus in your project is things that can give you space and fill you up. But do take time. And so thinking about those as part of the work and not something like to the side of the work, again, is just like a structural change that we have to think about, but one I'm trying to surface here as an opportunity for us to consider as part of the work. So I don't actually know if a famous person said this, but it's the kind of the point is like, you are not the first person to do this thing. And this has been something that's just been really important to me. I say sort of like every new project I take on, every role, there's always something that I don't know how to do. And I would say like, don't tell the people that I work for, past or present, that's true, but that's not true. I'm very honest about that. Because one of the things that I really like to do is learn new things and to learn from what other people have done. And so one of the places that this is like really amazing is that a lot of templates for things exist. And so if you think, I need to do this thing, again, like you don't have to do it on your own. What resources are out there where people in this community have spent a lot of time that you could use or look at as you're building up your project? Okay. So one of the key places that there are really great templates now, and this is due to the work of a lot of people and organizations over the years, is in GitHub or GitLab repository setup. So there are some key files and that can go in every repository. And the reason that these files are really important is they help to outline the expectations for your project. And that's about managing expectations and setting boundaries. And so having these files is a great start to being able to say, like, here's what we do, here's what we don't do, here's what we expect of the community, and here's what we don't. So few places that have some great resources for this. So GitHub, they have a lot of templates now that you can use. But communities like PyOpenSci and rOpenSci both have a lot of information about these files and about packaging guidelines. And then the use this package from Posit makes a lot of these things just sort of built in. So let me talk just about a couple. So I highlighted PyOpenSci and rOpenSci. So both of these organizations are about publishing R or Python packages. But I would say the sort of extra special thing about these organizations is about their guidance around creating packages and overall improving the ecosystem in terms of the quality of the packages, again, without you having to like figure it out on your own. And both of these communities are communities. So they're places where you can join and ask questions and learn about things as you go as well. So in fact, PyOpenSci has a Build Your First Python Package workshop coming up on April 25th. And you probably Google it and find it, but I can add in the link at the end as well. So I work with PyOpenSci, so I'm a little more aware what's coming up for them, but rOpenSci, I'd love to hear the kinds of things they have coming up as well. So these are great resources for learning about like that repository structure. The other is that use this package that I mentioned. So if you are using use this, if you use, there's create package, the command create package, but there's create tidy package. And that creates most of the structure that the Tidyverse team uses for creating their packages. So you can see already it pre-populates with things like the README and the license and the description, things for CRAN comments. So again, like looking at what's been built will help you a lot in thinking about what's possible. Okay. Okay. And it's not just GitHub repos. You're like, I already knew about GitHub repos. Okay. That is awesome. And so there's other things that have other templates. So things like responses to issues. You're like, oh my gosh, how do I respond to this person? You can look and see what other kinds of responses people have used, like collect those and think about and base it off another response that you've seen. So I don't actually know of a place where there's a list of responses right now. That's, maybe something we want to build together. But issue templates, a lot of projects have templates for their issues. Again, I know Tidyverse does, and Nixla, where I'm working, we have templates. Release checklist, community practices, PR review, spring cleaning. So this is a checklist from the Tidyverse for the release. Every package, no matter how many times you've done a package release, it always goes through this checklist. And checklists are great ways of formalizing practices that you want to have happen. So sort of things that can be considered norms, but actually are things that we want to write down and make sure happen every time, no matter how experienced you might be. So one of the other things that I really love is the Tidy Team code review principles. So Davis Vaughn worked on this. And so this is, how do we do code review? What kinds of times can people expect? So again, this is like, I encourage you to go check this out if you're thinking about how you want to write up templates or guidance for how you do PR review. And then finally, spring cleaning is something that you can do as like a maintenance. So like once every 6 months, once every year, what's the list of things that you want to do? So even there's templates for what kind of maintenance tasks do we want to do every year. Okay, awesome. So you've asked yourself these questions, and I'm telling you there's all these templates, but the real challenge and opportunity is where questions and templates meet. So this is just an example contributing file from just a random GitHub repository. So it has all these sections, code of conduct, asking questions, opening an issue. And then, there's text under each of these things. And you could grab somebody else's. That's, again, a great way to start, especially a project where you like the community or you like their practices. But the challenge is then, okay, what text do I want to write in here? And this is where you're going to go back to how much time do we have? What are the goals of our project? What is the stage of our project? So for instance, if you've decided that your project is sunsetting or is already at this sunsetting phase, so you're sort of wrapping things up, a section where you might write in submitting pull requests. If you would fill out that section, you would have some different language. You would be saying, you may submit a pull request, but we're not going to accept them. Or we only accepted this type of pull request where we're changing errors, we're not adding any new features. And so as you're going through these different sections to reflect on what your goals are and the time and capacity that you have. And this is really where it all comes together because it is about managing expectations and setting boundaries. Let's see what's my next one. Okay, so it'll again. I'm saying, oh, there's all these things, but all of these things do require some work to think about how you write that language. So you've done that. You've written things down. Like, okay, this is where we want to set our boundaries. And you could say, but people don't always read our documentation. And that is true. I myself don't always read all the documentation for a project. But the reason to write it down is because so you can point to it when someone asks a question and you can share it with new contributors. So if you've written it down and you have someone come into an issue and say something like, why won't you merge my pull request? Or, you know, and something along those lines, you can respond by pointing to something that you've written down already. That's a lot easier to do than trying to sort of recreate those boundaries through every issue. To write them down and sort of formalize them, and then be able to say, like, this is the way that we work, or we don't do that here. When you have those, that's why code of conducts are powerful, is it's a way to point to something and say, we don't do that here. And so all of this other kinds of documentation can have that same kind of power for you, where it's something that you can point to. And it's a way when you're onboarding new contributors, both to say, again, this is the way we work. These are our expectations for our team, but also to know for them that they have boundaries. We don't expect you to be answering issues 24/7. We don't expect these things. And so that can make a new contributor more likely to want to participate when then they know that there are guardrails around what's expected of them. But this is really hard, right? This is a thing in our lives of setting boundaries, managing expectations. Like the people that um, most don't want you to have boundaries are the people who will get the angriest when you try to enforce them. And so again, there are challenges, but the place that you can start is by being clear to yourself, and writing those things down and sharing them as you can. Okay, that was kind of like a heavy topic. They're all like that, except maybe this one's a little less. Um, okay, so that was all about kind of templates and structures and things about managing expectations and related to documentation. But one of the things when I was asking open source maintainers, like, what do you wish you would have learned sooner? And over again, one of the things I heard was tooling, right? And so, like, I've been working on this project and I kind of just keep going along, but once I finally learned how continuous integration works, or testing, or got better at GitHub, or finally use this package, that was me. My life improved so much. But again, it's hard to say, like, how am I going to spend the time to learn, to spend a day learning about testing when I could do this other thing, by hand. So when is the trade-off of when you should be learning a tool? So XKCD comes through again, little maybe less positive about some of the trade-offs, but it's the same idea of programming. Like, if you're doing something over and over again, at a certain point, it makes sense to learn that thing. And so, like, these are some examples, but I would love to hear from you. What is one of your favorite tools? Oxygen. That's a good one. Nice. Data pasta. Interesting. GitHub Actions. Yes, I should have written that one. That one was one that came up a lot. GitHub Actions. Um, Test that. Excellent. Nice. Azure DevOps. Awesome. I think that's a great one to call out. Like Azure. I think sometimes, like, I came from in open source from academia, so I wasn't as familiar with some of these bigger platforms. Kind of was working at the command line and in R, but a lot of these platforms have really great tooling. But then again, that's like another thing. Like, oh, how can I take the time to learn that or start to learn? Data.table, GitHub Actions. All right, GitHub Actions, top of this list. Awesome. Well, this poll will stay too. And so maybe I can pull out like what some of the ones that so that we can like you can see maybe different kinds of things to check out. Okay. Oh, I thought I had it. Okay. So so those are great. So that's like amazing tooling. So I definitely like listen to all the folks. Like I would say, like in preparing for this talk, I was running through the slides with people, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, that one for sure." So um, maybe pick one that you have been wishing that you wanted to learn about. And so that those are great. But we don't have just like physical tools. Other kinds of things that we can learn about are leadership tools. And the one of the challenges with the leadership tools space is that sometimes we think that these things are just like natural to people. Like you're sort of either born knowing how to communicate effectively or you're not. And that it this is like any skill. It is something that we can get better at. Sure, where people end at the end of the day might be different, but these are things that we have the opportunity to learn as well. And the reason it feels like a really big shift sometimes is because a lot of the times, if I'm looking back at the reasons that people started the project, there were lots around like really wanting to contribute to the community, but there also were a lot around like I needed to solve this problem. So the way that a lot of us enter open sources through code, right? And so that's what we're good at. That's what we spent our time in. That's like where we feel a sense of mastery. A lot of these things, like nobody taught us. We haven't had places to learn them. Like I didn't have a project governance class in college. So yes, there's social sciences too that provide a lot of the foundational background for these practices. But in terms of like these practices and having opportunities to learn them and practice them, that's not something, at least that I had a lot of experience learning with a science degree. And so these again were like all things that I struggled with and had to learn on the job. Oh, sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Okay, well, I think it's fine unless someone tells me. Um, so, oh, sorry. Okay, so I'm so sorry, including learning how to navigate technology on a talk. So we have these things, and so I just really struggled with these as well. So when I went from being in academia to working at the Carpentries and as the director of the Carpentries, there were so many things around project management and governance and conflict resolution that I didn't know, that I felt like I had to go and learn on my own. And I have read a million books and made a lot of mistakes. And I've tried to continue learning these things. And this is one of the things that I feel like we can continue to learn together about. Um, so I'm so sorry. I'm not doing well with the echo. I'll figure it out in a second. Okay. But these are really important and exciting. So they're super fun. So people don't necessarily agree with me, but like as I made the transition from being a programmer to being in management or running projects or running organizations, I found it really interesting to sort of think about different kinds of structures, different pathways, like kind of in the same way as like solving science problems or coding problems, that these presented as challenges and like things to learn about and solve as well. Okay. So I want to talk about one of my most favorite things, which is project planning. And the reason that I love project planning is, of course, that you end up with a project plan that helps you get something done. But the actual key around project planning is that it's not necessarily about the plan itself, but it's about the conversation that creates the plan. Because where I've seen most projects go wrong is not that like there were smart people with good intentions and good ideas. It's that they thought they were all working towards the same thing. And in fact, they weren't. And so um, one of the things to do is to sit down together and to create the plan. And what that does is it creates a shared understanding of what needs to be done. And so it helps you resolve those conflicts or those questions before you start the project, rather than getting partway into the project and arguing about a PR, because you actually are not thinking about the project in the same way. It lets you have those discussions in the space of this conversation where you're planning in the first place. So these are, I guess, 7 things that you can articulate. So project roles: who's doing what, who's in charge, who's going to be responsible for make sure it's being completed. But maybe there's other people that need to be involved that you hadn't necessarily thought about. Who needs to be involved and what are their roles? The motivation: why are you doing this project? This is a place where you can spend some time again to get on that same shared understanding. Then aims: what does success look like? And how will you know? How will you measure it? Do you have metrics in place, or a way of analyzing if it's been successful? Maybe you need to think about building those as well when you're doing this project. This is just as important: anti-aims. So what's not a goal? This can be something about feature creep. And so what you want to be clear, like, no, we are not doing this as a part of this project. Then how will you do this? So then that's kind of the place where people sort of normally start, is like, what are the actions you're going to take? But then the proposal is, yeah, what are the how can come from the other part. And then communications: what communications will be needed? So a lot of times we think about the communications as separate from the project, but this encourages us to think about communication as a part of the project. Who are we going to need to tell about things when? Do we want to give people some advance notice? Do we need places where we're going to have feedback? Where are we going to share about the announcements to make sure the people who need to know about this know about this? So again, building this into the project. And then finally, the resources needed. What are the kinds of things that you're going to need? Do you need money? Do you need people? Do you need software? So I have this project planning template as a Google Doc, if it's something that you find helpful. But these are, again, I guess I have more questions than answers. So questions you can ask yourself as you start a project. So in both the set of the tools like GitHub Actions as well as his leadership tools, I just saw this quote actually the other day and I really liked it. Because this is spending time to work on your project and not just in your project. And so it's a different way of working. But the important thing is that it's not just about the project. When you're investing about learning any kind of tools, you're investing in yourself and what you can do in the future. Because I'll say throughout, I'm very invested in the open source ecosystem and it being healthy and successful, but I care most about the health of the people working in open source. And so places where you see like that you can be investing in yourself or what you're learning are places where it's okay to put attention. So you're worth the time it takes to learn a new skill. All right, so the inevitable, what if I'm already burned out? So instead of supporting the structure, you are now not able to do that. I want to acknowledge this question without really having answers. This is really important. All of the things that I'm talking about still, while I'm saying, oh, hey, there's things that can help you, they are still things that have you doing something. And maybe you're not at a place where that's possible right now. And there are a lot of resources around burnout that do a better job of articulating the types of things that you can do. And I think, and the challenge is, if you're in this place, like, how do you find them? How do you find your way out? And I think some of the best ways are asking for help. And one of the hardest things. is so finding someone else who's gone through this, just to have a shared feeling of understanding and know that you're not alone, can be really meaningful. But I don't want to gloss over this or give any advice that seems cavalier, because this is something that is really foundational in open source and really a problem. And it's not okay to keep asking people to carry more and not provide them the support that they need. And so overall, it would be nice if we didn't have to learn all of the leadership skills. Um, so, right, I'm like, oh, hey, you can like learn all these tools, and then you can also learn conflict management, project management, and you're like, wow, that feels like a lot. And you are not wrong. A lot of projects out there have identified this as a challenge. SustainOS, Iqbal has this Roads and Bridges books. Tidelift, Building Infrastructure, GitHub has this README project. There's a lot of places that sort of acknowledge the challenges in open source, and that we're like asking open source maintainers to wear a lot of hats. And that is true. And I wish that I was different. And I'm not spending too much time on that right now, because I wanted to focus on things that were possible and accessible. But one of the places I think where we could really grow support infrastructures is through things like our Facebook sponsorship landscape. And there's a lot of movement in that space right now. Some of the key projects closing, changing their models. And none of those things are serving the maintainers that need to figure out how to get access to money, to get paid to do their work, have health insurance for the things that they do. And that's a place where structurally we need to put some attention, is around the structural supports for maintainers, so that they don't have to necessarily do everything by themselves, that they don't need to be entrepreneurs and business leaders, as well as writing code, and being able to find their areas of interest and strength and focusing there, and finding other people to complement what they do. Companies are another place where people can get paid to work on open source, and how that's structured is different at different companies. So this is a real space that we need to address right now as the funding models for open source are changing as well. Okay, but we'll go back to being together. So I'm saying, like, there are some answers, they're not answers, but like, where can we keep each other notified, ask questions? And I think one of the things that we've seen is like, there's great support, like within our OpenSci and Pi OpenSci, people can talk to each other. So there's lots of sort of separate spaces where people can talk to each other about open source leadership, but not kind of like a central place. And that still won't be true. We're never going to solve everything. But one of the things then, again, in talking with some folks, is that they were interested in places to connect. So you may have heard earlier the data science learning community has book clubs and places for people to connect. And I've been working on Tidy Tuesday for about 1.5 years. So I spent a lot of time in that Slack channel. So we started a channel, Chat Open Source Leadership, that you could join, where we could continue some of these discussions. Okay, so I'll wrap up with, again, another question. So what could change with AIs and LLMs? So some of the things that I've heard are code with Copilot, more easily write documentation. There's a lot of different things that could come and change the landscape in open source. So I have a final question for us, and then I'll wrap up and take some questions from the audience. Okay, so LM chatbots, right? They help you understand other code more easily. Automating tasks, easier to learn new things. Funding is being discussed more. That is important. Um, Give it another minute here, see what comes through. Um, awesome. Yes, this is one I've seen. Good tests if you're going to trust LLM or encode. Yep. How is our open source being used? How is our documentation being used? How can it help create documentation? But then also, how is that documentation used? And do people then come to our sites? Yeah. So I think one of the things that's really interesting in this space is even we can see in the responses here is both the opportunities that it presents, but the challenges as well. And I think, again, I'll say it, I keep saying it over and over. This is a shared opportunity for learning. And we've been through a lot of these cycles before. But how can we come together and learn and share new practices? So finally, take care of you. You are the most important thing in open source. Your health, your safety, your joy. And so I hope you find those things and that there are structures that can support you in doing that better. So thank you so much for the opportunity to give this talk. Such a great community and conference, and I really want to acknowledge and thank all the people that I've learned from over the years and continue to be friends and support for me as I continue to learn. So.
All right. Thank you so much, Tracy. We have 3 questions for you. So we have one from Ariana. If you want to contribute to open source but you're a beginner, where would you suggest getting started?
Could you repeat the question?
Okay.
Sorry.
So if you want to contribute to open source but you're a beginner, where would you suggest getting started?
Great question. So if you want to contribute to open source as a beginner, where would you start? I maybe have something a little controversial to say about that, which is I would start with your own project. Um, and then start with a project that you use regularly. So one of the challenge, lots of times the recommendation is, start by contributing to documentation. That's actually a very hard place to start sometimes because you have to have a deep understanding of the project and then an ability to write about it. And so you can hone some of your skills around like putting in GitHub PRs or like with a friend, like get good and comfortable with GitHub and comfortable with PR reviews. So that actually just Kat Allman had a paper come out around PR review anxiety. That thing is real. So basically finding any space where you feel safe to make mistakes and practice there. And that might be a public open source project, but it might be that you start a sandbox open source project with 3 of your friends and you start there.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. I hope that answers your question. So we have another question from Sunday. Any advice for approaching an established open source community or group and pitching your idea?
So advice for approaching an open source community and pitching your idea. Yeah, great. I love that. Again, you want to understand the community a little bit. Different communities are more friendly and psychologically safe for new ideas than others. If this is your first time doing it, I would recommend finding one of those communities, even if it's a small idea to get to practice. But the issue system is great for pitching ideas. So in general, a project will like it if you propose an issue before you put in a PR, so that there's a space for discussion. So do read the documentation about how that project likes to have issues created, or maybe there are things like PEPs or Tidyverse started to have tidy ups. So follow the conventions of that project, look at other ones that people have put in that have been successful, and follow those guidelines. But yeah, the issue mechanism is great.
All right, thank you so much. I hope that answers your question, Sunday. Then we have one final question from Pavel Ruki. I have observed on myself that such dev guides got outdated very soon, so I learned not to overdo this. What would be your advice to make it a low maintenance item?
I'm sorry, just repeat the question.
All right, so he's asking, I have observed on myself that such developer guides got outdated very soon, so I learned not to overdo this. What would be your advice to make it a low maintenance item?
Um,
Pretty interesting question.
Sorry, I did have the other window open. That was my problem. I've got it squared away now. Just one more time, real quick, and then I know we have to move on. Can you repeat it?
No problem. So he's asking, it's about the developer guides for, I think it's for people who are joining or who want to contribute. So they get outdated over time. So
Oh,
how do
yes.
like, what would be your advice to make it a low maintenance item?
Great question. Yeah, that's not an easy one. I would say if you have significant discussions with your team where you decide to do things differently, that would be an opportunity to update your documentation. But also to implement something like a spring cleaning, where once a year or once every 6 months, you go and you review things and you update them. So to make it a part of like your scheduled maintenance is to review those things in your documentation as well. It's great to appreciate that those things get outdated, and that to be a part of your review as well as other code tasks.
All right, thank you so much. And we will be taking a quick break now. So thank you so much, Tracy, and see you all later. Bye
Thank
bye.
you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Take care.